Hello, and a very warm welcome to this week's Be My Guest. And my guest this week is a gentleman by the name of Marcus Boswell. And Marcus Boswell is another person who I consider to be a friend who I've never met. So yes, we're back to the digital world of digital. But I do consider him as a friend. We do have a good chat about things. Got a lot of respect for this guy. He's got a lot of knowledge and a lot of really strong insight. And he's going to talk to us today about a few different bits and pieces. He's going to tell us about his background, and he's going to tell us about his work, which is particularly relevant and interesting to all businesses, really, but specifically maybe small and medium-sized businesses. So a very, very warm welcome to Be My Guest, Marcus.
Thank you, sir. It's a pleasure. It's great to actually finally make this happen. You know, as you say, it's incredible when you think about how we met and the digitalness, which I absolutely love. So I think that's great. Thank you for indulging me.
You're very welcome. Hey, listen, mate, you must be doing something right, because not everybody gets invited onto this show, you know.
Well, yeah, I'll take that. Funnily enough, I mean, to your audience, I'd have to share the story, perhaps, of how we met. Although I'm not sure I remember it the same way that you do. But back in the days of Blab, which was one of the yet another social platforms that were out there, we had an interesting opportunity, really. At that time, Blab was, for those who don't know, you split your computer screen into four and you could speak to people all around the world, much like Skype now. And Phil and a couple of other people were doing a show. I guess you probably need to gap fill on exactly what that was about, but I remember coming in and being pretty excited about the tech aspect of it all, and I guess hopefully your listeners will get the vibe that I tend to be quite interested in technical doodads, as a colleague of mine called it just today, and the top tech tips section of the show was born. So
not that we could ever say it.
No, I took a great deal of time to try and say that right on this occasion.
Yeah, well, the channel really was on Blab, as Marcus says. The channel was basically some insights, ideas, inspiration from people who predominantly were working from home. It was the home working network, basically.
That's right.
And the only reason it kind of stopped really is we got busy, as often happens, but obviously at the same time, Blab changed its model and did something with its technology, and life went on. So anyway, start off, mate. Just tell us a bit about you and what it is you do these days and a bit of your background.
Okay, so I guess sensible to start with where I am now. So today I am a freelance social selling consultant, and I'll come back to what that's about and what that means in just a moment. But certainly, as far as my background, I've predominantly been in sales. I would certainly consider myself to be a salesperson first and foremost, aren't we all? And I more recently, I guess in the last few years, certainly in the last 8 or so, was working for a large corporate HR and payroll company, one of the largest. I don't want to give them any airplay, so I'm not even going to mention their name particularly, but if you want to know and you're curious out there, go look me up on linkedin.uk/Marcus Boswell and you can go find out. In fact, there's a great article, I think it's great anyway, but I wrote a very heartfelt article on the early days. I don't know, maybe I even sent it to you, Phil, on the down low. Well, there you go. And at that time I was, for anybody who's been made redundant, it's a strange thing because you feel like you've just been kicked in the proverbials, you know. And hey, I love money. I've realized this in the time that I've not been working for a large corporate. Anyway, I had a great career with those guys, and I certainly very much enjoyed that. But you know, all parties come to an end, and that's essentially what happened. The US side of the organization, and it was a US company, sort of swallowed up the European side. I was the head of social innovation and manager of social presence. So I had responsibility over about 15 European countries and about 800 salespeople. When I say responsibility, I was a resource for those 800 salespeople. So I was that enthusiastic social dude who always had something to share with those people that needed to know it. And I predominantly worked with a couple of very specific, what they used to call the MNC or the multinational team in Europe. So my head office was in France and so on. So that was definitely a bit of a blow to obviously lose that career, but it in truth actually set me on a slightly different path. And ironically, the fact that you and I met, and when we met, you might recall that even in those days, the tendency to want to kind of push marcusboswell.com as it is now, and being a little bit concerned about that juxtaposition between taking this time off to do that rather than talking about this organization that I work for. That was already something that was bubbling away in the background for me and was a little bit difficult to sort of manage. And I was very respectful of that corporate relationship. So I'm out of the matrix, the shackles are off, and here I am literally 12 months later after that process. My wife and I, we moved into the dream home. I have 2 young boys, and I had 3 boxes left to unpack when I heard this dreaded news that I was going to be made redundant. And so I spent a few months licking my wounds, as you do, because hey, I'd be nuts to try and pretend this didn't affect me. I think the difference for some people is that this is a choice that they make. Hi everybody, I'm leaving on this date, I'm going to go ahead and do this, and everybody wishes them well, and they give them the chocolates and the watch and whatever, and they go off and they make their successes happen. But this wasn't the case for me. Mine was much more of a be careful what you wish for. Essentially I've been sort of putting out this aura. I'm not one of those, what do they call it? Woo-woo types of guys, I don't like to think. But I probably was speaking to the universe a lot for a lot longer than I realized about exactly what it was that I wanted to do and who I wanted to be. And so that's the mission that I'm on today. As a freelance social selling consultant, my main aim is to help small, medium, and large corporates, if needs be, organizations really, to really optimize their social presence and understand how it is that they are operating, how they're seen, and what they can do to sort of advance their sales process.
Okay, that's brilliant. I think for what it's worth, I think a lot of people can relate to everything you've just said about the redundancy process and the feelings that and the emotions that it creates. But at the same time, I would suggest that from my experience, a lot of people end up going out their own because they're turfed out the nest as opposed to jumping out of it.
Yes.
Because you're absolutely crapping it that you're going to jump out the nest, bat your wings and fly straight down nose first into the field below.
That's it.
So that's quite a normal situation. Talk to me then in kind of practical terms what social selling is and how it might differ from, how it might be relevant today. I'm assuming it is more relevant today as opposed to what 10, 15 years ago, if at all 10, 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. Where's it come from and what does it mean in practical terms?
Okay, so this is a perfectly honest and great question. And I think just to précis this in a sense, I mean, just on LinkedIn, just yesterday, I actually posted an audio link using a new, or not so new, but a platform called Anchor, which is a podcasting platform, which you're aware of yourself. And I was asking the question for the purposes of writing an article that I'll be releasing soon enough about this very question, what is social selling anyway, or whatever clever title that I give it. But the interesting thing here is what, like some of the oldest professions, social in itself has been going on forever, right? People talk to one another, people make relationships, people like people, the sales people out there who are perhaps listening, and including yourself, you'll be familiar with that aspect, that people like themselves, and all of those cliches that go with it. And on the cliche note, one of the things that a lot of people within social circles or social media circles have latched onto in the past several years is the aspect that it's about the know, like, and trust factor. And I cringe a little bit as I say it, but it's very, very true. And, as to where it came from, I think it's most certainly, I mean, social media in itself is still a very young business, right? So you've got social networks like Facebook, of course, everybody knows that story because it's a pretty common one, but other platforms, Instagrams, the Snapchats of the world, and others that are on their way up now. And of course, all of those third-party tools as well, whether that's buffers and the Hootsuites and the schedulers and all of these different things, all of that is really a food frenzy going on based on the success of the social media marketplace. But when all said and done, you can most likely relate to the fact that in the end, social selling at its core is about using social media to identify opportunities and to move conversations forward in a way that wasn't really happening before. I can remember a time in my most recent career where if you were on LinkedIn, the only reason why you were doing that was to look for another job as far as anyone was concerned. It was something that you did on your lunch break and you didn't want somebody looking over your shoulder. Twitter didn't exist. A funny story about that. I remember my first day on this new job, and the head of marketing comes in, and she's having a long conversation about various bits and bobs. And there's this thing where they say, "Oh, any questions?" At the end, as they do. And I remember I was sitting, I think, in the third row from the front. It reminded me of that dreadful episode of Cry Freedom when I was at school, the only black kid at the front of the class, and there's layers of people. I could feel the back of my head burning. So anyway, I'm sitting there, and I said, yeah, so do you have a strategy around Twitter? Or what's happening there? This woman paused for a moment, looked at me and said, and I S you not. She said, "Twit what? Twit who?" And that was not that long ago. I mean, that's 8 years ago, and everybody started laughing, and I was absolutely considered to be a geek from that moment forth. And that followed me for a good 6 months, to the point where whenever this individual came in and did a talk, no matter where I was in the room, which was never ever again 3 rows from the front, she would sort of say, "Any questions?" And they'd pause and they'd say, "Marcus," wherever I was. "Yeah, no, you're okay," from the back. So yeah, for sure, social media is young for the most part. And because of that, a lot of people are still getting used to how that works. So in practical terms, social media and social selling specifically is about utilizing social media in order to move your sales process forward. And the real question here becomes, well, how do you do that? For my part, one of the services that I offer is about that business profiling service, for example. So I would maybe look at a business and say, okay, because this is one of the crucial things, it's not the same response for everybody. I have a client who loves Snapchat. Personally, I'm totally not bothered about Snapchat. It's not where I like to play. But he does. And so obviously he has a following there and an opportunity to engage his audience there with what he's doing. I mentioned Anchor, which is probably, like, a lot of the audience will be like, who? I mean, again, that's probably 2, maybe 3 years old now. I think they're doing some phenomenal things as far as innovation, their transcription opportunities, and the way that they're doing editing of audio, and the way that you're able to share things. Phenomenal. Video, great. Will that survive? I hope so. But, like the blabs before us, we kind of use blab as almost an expression now to indicate technology that can die, that was great, but that can die. And the elephant in the room, of course, is LinkedIn. This is a huge platform. They don't have, I think, what did they hit? 500 million users most recently within the last 2 or 3 months or so. They certainly are not Facebook. Facebook dwarfed that several times in many ways. But again, it depends on where your audience is and the tribe and the network that you're trying to build. If your customers are, if you're a B2C type of business, then you might use Facebook more predominantly. If you're a B2B type of business, then you kind of really need to be on LinkedIn, whether you're using it predominantly or not. And it depends on how you activate and how you execute that.
What do you think? Very interesting insight there, because one of the things that I notice, and I'll use LinkedIn as a really good example, is people say to me quite often, I use LinkedIn, but it's not that much good. And you say, okay, well, why is it not much good? What do you do on it? And then they go, what do you mean? What do I do on it? Well, do you use it as a tool, or do you expect it to mow a bit like a lawnmower? Do you expect it to mow the lawn while you're sat on your ass in the conservatory? And they kind of get that. But do you find that there's people almost, social media in general, but I'm thinking LinkedIn, particularly with the business context, almost expect it to do magical things, a bit like a fairy zipping around the garden? Or, in terms of it needs to do it on its own without using it as a tool?
Sure. Well, I wish I could come up with a clever analogy at this point, and I'll need to think of a few. But I think in layman's terms, the answer is absolutely not. It will not do anything for you, and unless you do it yourself. The truth is, I had a colleague of mine, an old boss in a previous life, that used to say, do stuff, to stuff, for stuff. He'll know who he is if he's out there. It's very true, and LinkedIn's just the same. I'll give you a good example of one of my experiences in the last 12 months. So during this period, it's been important to me, obviously, to market my business and to make connections with people. And so LinkedIn has become, even more so than it was in the previous life, a tool to use for doing exactly that. So I have ingratiated myself with a larger group of people who are similar to myself, who have skills and services that they offer in this marketplace for a couple of different reasons. One, because I like to know what the competition is doing out there. The other way, because I think it's important to make a new friend before you need one. And it's really useful to be able to have trusted advisors, people you can talk to. And back to that point I was making about know, like, and trust. There's enough out there for everyone. You don't have to tear somebody else down to get ahead. And so, although my focus has tended in the past, because of my background and because of the work I was doing for the organization, it tended to be around nurturing the sales force and helping sales enablement and the sales force to utilize whatever platforms were necessary. With these new eyes that I have, it's actually really important to me to make sure that my customer base understand that there is more to it than LinkedIn, more to it than that. And it's actually down to, how do you want to engage? Where are your customers? I mean, there's one thing that I often say, as far as social media is concerned, and that is really, it comes down to, when your people search for you, or when your customer searches for you, what is it that they find? Now, this is a great leveler into your point or question, specifically relating to LinkedIn. There is a very well-known set of rules, if you will, to the way in which you should project yourself on LinkedIn. The only issue is, it seems like common sense to people like me, and probably to you. But the fact is, that's the one thing that's true about that, is that common sense is not common. So having a photo, I mean, just today I had a connection request from somebody who claims to be an expert in the industry, and I'm looking at that blank grey space. I don't know what this person looks like. I mean, does that make me kind of want to know who that is in a crowded sea of noise? No, it doesn't. So there's certain things you can do, whether that's your image, whether that's absolutely having your summary in place, and so on. There's so many things to be said.
Okay, so I've got social media, I've got LinkedIn, I've got Facebook, I've got Snapchat, I've got Instagram, I've got all this. And I go, oh, great, I've got these things now, so I can now advertise my business. And I go, right, hello, my name's Phil. Here's my pens. They're mega, 20 quid a piece. Who wants to buy one? That's it, isn't it?
Quite the opposite. And you make a good point there. And here's the thing, and I think this is one of the things that a lot of people do. They go on and they go, me, look at me, I'm over here, look at me. It's like walking into a party and literally standing in the corner just shouting, me, me, me. No one cares. Okay, nobody wants to hear about you. Nobody wants to hear about your business. What they care about, actually, and you know this just from what you said, is what they care about is themselves. They want you to show an interest in them. And horrible expression, slowly catchy monkey or whatever. I saw this thing where they had the coconut, and you saw this on social most recently. A monkey will, if you make a little hole in a coconut, hollow it out, and put some sort of bait in there, the monkey will go in, put his hand in, and then grab hold of the whatever treat is in there. You will catch that monkey purely because it will not let go and release itself. That is how they're caught. And this is a very similar situation with social media. People tend to use just this simple bait, my product's the only thing I'm prepared to talk about. And this is very, very true of the corporate marketplace. Indeed, this organization I used to work with had exactly the same problem. That we talk about the 80-20 rule, or the 4-2-1, if you will. So 4 things about other people, 2 things about yourself, 1 thing about your business. This is the type of ratio by which you might want to share things. And again, I said that in a very common sense way, but that might not be apparent to some people. It's a pretty good rule of thumb, 4 things about other people, or maybe the industry, or something that you're interested in, a couple of things perhaps about yourself, and then maybe 1 thing about your company. Because whatever you want to do or don't want to do, you don't really want to use social media as a platform to just sell. We're immersed in that on a daily basis. There is more information available now every single day than in all of human history before it. I mean, that's just an incredible statistic to get your head around, right? I mean, so I'm doing a little bit of training right now. I miss the corporate bods where you could roll into a room and somebody's paid for a great deal of training that you can sit down and take. But I don't need that, because why do I need that? I've got the second largest search engine in the world sitting right there. You know, you've got YouTube, you can jump on, type anything you like. And as long as you've got the time and the patience, you can literally learn anything from ground zero upwards. So there is absolutely no excuse, to be honest, why any business doesn't take the opportunity to utilize social media. And it does shock me that so many people don't. And I'm not saying it's the be all and end all. I had an opportunity to take a break over the summer period with my family. We all went camping. I don't know what I was thinking, but that's another story. But I went into this store in a small place in Cornwall. It was called Megavissey, I think. I don't know if you're familiar with the town.
Yeah, I do know it, yeah.
Well, it was a weird place because you sort of drive in and you feel like you're stuck in a roundabout, a very small roundabout, but there's people milling around. It's very strange. Anyway, I walked into this fantastic, wonderful store that sold pictures, these paintings, beautiful things they were, wonderful landscapes and scenery of the local stuff. And my kids were being kids, and they were outside of ice creams and stuff. I told them to hang outside, and I had a full-on social media head on. So I walk in and I said to this lady, I was thinking, great, I'll look at this as a business opportunity maybe, and how can this work? I'd like to tell people about this experience. And I strolled and I said, so do you have a card? I mean, are you on online? She said, well, no, I haven't got a card, but I've got this brochure, right? And this brochure was kind of just about them, just there. I said, okay, great. So are you on the web? Well, no. Really? I mean, these are paintings, right? This is visual. It's as good as it gets. No. She said, we used to be, and that was another floor-dropping moment. Now, get this. They took themselves offline because, as far as they were concerned, they couldn't deal with all of the drop shipping issues, understandable reasons for people who are selling paintings. They were getting too many calls for damages and things of that nature. So they decided, instead of making some changes to the business or to their policies, they would just kill the whole online thing at all. So they've cut their legs away. I will never be able to buy anything from them online. I have to kind of visit that town and drive around in that circle to appreciate, just nuts. It was absolutely breathtaking.
Staggering.
It is. But although we balk at that, I actually think the truth is that's not that strange. I think if we really surveyed this, I think there's a lot of businesses out there that fit into the same boat. If you said to a business, okay, so how much business did you get from your website last week? Nothing. Okay, last month, last year. The truth is many people don't actually recognize what business they've gotten from their website because they're just static places where they're just kind of throwing up information. Social media, on the other hand, this fast flowing river. I remember a stat I had on my wall. I'm sure it's much changed now, but so don't quote me on this out there. But truth is, what is it? 72,000 tweets a minute or something crazy like that. I need to refresh myself on specific Twitter stats, but it's fast, right? Whatever you do is gone. So therefore, a Twitter strategy might be not to share something once and expect it to live forever, but actually maybe to share that same thing several times, maybe even that day. So depending on your platform that you're using, LinkedIn versus Twitter versus Facebook, whatever, there are different rules to those games and different opportunities for your business as a result. And that's where somebody like me comes in, because of course I'm playing in that space and appreciate different examples of how individuals might choose to use that. So I'm sort of cutting through that knowledge gap for them. But it's very important.
Well, let me ask you a question then, because I've been pontificating about this for a little while, and I'm not too far about grasping the nettle. I don't know if I'm crazy, but you'll be a great sanity check, and I'm doing it here in public. In the age of social media, in particular thinking LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, Vimeo perhaps, I'm wondering now whether we need a website anymore. And what the part of the thought process I'm going through is that if people don't feel that we're worth talking to, because nobody will buy us off a website. If people don't think that we're worth engaging with or engaging with or talking to off the back of reading LinkedIn, Facebook page, YouTube channel, Instagram page, will they ever open to you, sir?
It's a great question. It's one that I think a lot of people ask. And the fact that I myself, with thine own fine hand, crafted my web presence not that long ago, my answer is a resounding absolutely, you need a website. And I say that from the perspective that let us not forget. That's very biblical. And with good reason. Let it sink in, audience, and you particularly. I absolutely think you need a website, because everything else, when all said and done, is rented land. It really is. You don't know what's going to happen with Facebook tomorrow. Look, Facebook turned very pay to play not that long ago. The organic reach of your post that you threw up used to get a hell of a lot more people seeing it and interacting with it than it does today. There's a reason for that. You know, Instagram and Facebook now being one in the same, essentially. You put an advert on Facebook, you can propagate that same advert on Instagram, which is a clever place to have that visual imagery or video. And you can see over the course of a day or however long you run that advert exactly what's going on. However, when all said and done, that's a snapshot in time. What about 6 weeks from now? You know, do people go back to find you on Instagram or on Facebook? Probably not. You could build a presence there, don't get me wrong, but who's really benefiting from that? Is that you? You know, is that the Geeky Group? Is that marcusboswell.com, or is that Facebook? Yeah. Well, I mean, that's really, really important to grasp. I think the way that I like to think about it is that your website is kind of like your ranch, your home, your farm. You know, you're building this place, you're building your own little domain. And I liked the idea of driving all forms of traffic back eventually. So when my site is at its highest power, it will be the place that governs exactly where people can find me. And for me personally, that's why it's marcusboswell.com. Funny story, briefly, I bought marcusboswell.com and co.uk many, many years ago. It was in the pre-days of Crush It by Gary Vaynerchuk. It was a great book. I read it. I know you're a Gary man too, and like most people, I was inspired by what I heard and rushed out and did this thing. I knew that it was important for me to do it, but I couldn't quite work out why. Well, here I am in 2017, at least 5 years later, making use of that web presence that I purchased at that time. And I would have been gutted had I not been able to find my name, which I think will be harder as time goes on. So I think that was an investment back then. I think it's even more of an investment going forward in the future, because I think that as the social landscape changes, these organizations will become even more clever. They are doing some frightfully amazing things. Bots, 360 video, AI. I mean, it's nuts. I switch on it.
Nothing yet as this.
No, absolutely. And to my mind, I think it behooves you to control your little universe and, seed that with that helps your business to survive,
Great point. Yeah, great point. So thanks for that, because you've just convinced me to hold fire on my strange thinking. And it makes absolute sense what you've just said, and I totally agree. So I'll park that for now, which is brilliant. And I just wanted to ask you about your thoughts about corporate, because it's interesting you mentioned it. I deal with a few clients in the corporate space in particular who seem to be basically frightened to death about social media, with particular reference to giving any of the staff any access to it. Now you're laughing, which sounds like I'm not the only one that comes across this.
Yeah.
Is it something you've experienced, and what's your views on it?
Yes, I've experienced it personally, and I've experienced it professionally. Before they were one in the same. So in a previous life, like I said, you're in a situation where, if you think about it like this, that analogy that I gave you earlier on, where you used to be using a LinkedIn just for looking for jobs, and you'd be frightened if somebody happened to catch you on LinkedIn because they thought you were, about to do one, as they say. you imagine nowadays in this millennial environment, it cannot possibly be a shock for said employer to see somebody on Facebook, because that's the LinkedIn of that day, if that makes sense. There's business happening on Facebook. It's not just about people looking at their mates, or looking at what's going on. There's business happening there. I've got a business page there. Doubtless you've got a business page there. Yeah. So the landscape is absolutely changing. It's very important. And I think it's very important to sort of maintain that. I'm just conscious of looking at the time there as far as how long that was running, so I don't want to be too wordy, but I think it's definitely an important thing.
No, that's fantastic. It all flies by, and it's amazing how many people, as you know, I think you might be 390th interview,
which is amazing, by the way,
mate. But I think you're about 390th, and it's amazing how many people are worried that they'll dry up, and how you almost have to lasso them off once they get chatting about, because they're passionate about what they talk about, they're interested in what they talk about, and they know what they're talking about. So actually, it's very common for the time just to zip by, which is great. Okay, so covered quite a bit there. What do you think's coming? If I asked you to stare into the crystal ball, you mentioned AI there, which artificial intelligence, which a lot of people probably won't really know what that is. So just give me a crystal ball view, so we can look at this in 5 years' time and say you were a blithering idiot, you didn't know what you were talking about, or whether you are the genius that I think you are, and you actually came up with a bit of a vision in the future.
Well, is it Gretzky? I get to make at least this quote, Gretzky, that talks about going where the puck is, it likes to be where the puck is going. Well, that's me all day long. Since the earliest days, I was playing with Palm Pilots and bits and bobs when people thought I was nuts. I was the first guy to come back to the UK with an Apple iPod, and people looking at me like I was crazy with this little white piece of technology that was shiny. I remember it very well. Well, the fact that I'm on this mission now, for me, is the future. The way in which we interact in business in a social context is the future. Social selling is the future. There's no question that this relationship-based way of using social media and becoming more comfortable with the way in which conversations are made, networking with people, your network is your net worth. That's going to become so much more relevant as time goes on. There's no question this planet we live on is all about communicating. It is who you know, not what you know, as we've always naturally and instinctively known. And social media makes that possible on a scale that was never possible before, right? So that's the first thing. In terms of technically speaking on the ground, as in what's happening tomorrow, what's happening today, well, we talked about AI, and although that is still in the future, it's almost an old hat conversation because we see that happening. Like I said, if I go on Anchor and I hit this button, AI kicks in and says, hey, Marcus, today is, raining outside and it's this and that. These types of things are very natural. Jesus, we've got AI in our fridges right now, right? So you take your milk out and it knows you've taken your milk, and so it orders some more. These things are happening. That's
Amazon
happening.
Echo and
right.
Google.
Absolutely. There's a perfect example. So that's a real life version.
Yeah.
But I think the way that social media is starting to turn things around, and I think the gateway for the corporate environment to get involved in ways they weren't before is bots, BOTS. Because the opportunity to cut down interactions. So I go into customer, you've been there, you're on the phone, you're waiting for any more than a few seconds in this life that we've got is a pain in the backside. If I call a company, I want a responsive individual to tell me what I need to know, to help me with the process, to add value. And cleverly, the cleverest companies, in my opinion, are programming their bots to answer those frequently asked questions way ahead of time, so that long before I even get to speaking to a human being, I've actually most likely received the answer that I'm looking for. But I think the crucial piece that's been missed today is that I still want the bloody human being, right? And I think some people are going a bit too far the other way, and it takes me too long to get to that human being because the bot's not clever enough, right? I still need to ask a human some stuff. So I think that's where it's going. I think once they've tidied that up and you can't tell the difference between whether you're talking to a bot or you're talking to a human being, wow, the future makes me shiver.
Yeah, and then everybody working in call centres will be their knees will be knocking, and maybe their redundancy pale.
I hope not for their sake, because they do a tremendous job, but I just think the nature of what they do will change. And we see this in our current corporate environment. I remember just a few years ago talking to what we called our sales team, our telesales, who turned into telemarketers, who turned into something else. Don't keep changing their name. It doesn't change what they do, right? What we need to do is change what they do. They need to research their customers before they pick up the phone. And they need to do so many of those things. And the things that will make that much easier for them is if you get those guys. Well, I don't even want to sell for LinkedIn here and mention the types of premium access you can get, because this is half of my gripe. It's like they've got this entirely free sales force of people who are so enthusiastic saying, yes, you need a navigator license. No, you don't. What you need is something that works for you and something that makes sense for you. And if you're having trouble articulating what that is, well, don't want to sell, but that's what I'm all about, So, this is why that business profiling service for me is an important piece of the puzzle, because being able to help people to articulate, this is where I am, this is where I'm not. People don't know what they don't know, right? So, I think it's tremendous the work that you do. When I think about how we met and, the image that you've been able to do, the interviews you've done are phenomenal. I've listened to many, more than I expected to, quite frankly. I love the work that you're doing on Instagram. I think that's revolutionary, by the way. I think the way in which you approach your Instagram presence, in my view, is definitely something for your audience to look out for. And I, if I was pushing you and you were a client of mine and I was talking about the strategy that I would use if I was you, I would double down on that Instagram strategy, and I would go in deep on direct messaging and really start looking at talking to some of your customers and identifying them that way. But what do I know, dude? You've been in this longer than me.
No, absolutely. I really, really appreciate that. And it's great to get that feedback. And I knew you'd end up my agent at some point.
It would be my pleasure. You know that. Now, as ever, in our days of top tech tips, I always used to leave people with something. And I hadn't planned on doing this actually, but I was just thinking, what's the most relevant app? And I'm an iPhone person, but what's the coolest thing that I think I've probably used or got in the last several months? And actually, I think the one that really works for me the most, there's two actually. The one that I think is phenomenal is, and I've probably talked about this in the past, is called Drafts, Drafts. Not sure if it's available on Android, so sorry about that, guys. But what's cool about it for me is that it gives me an opportunity to dictate, just talk to my phone. And I know there's other dictation tools out there, but what this does that they may not do is it allows me to set up workflows. So I can say, I want you to send what I've just put in there on email, and then also send it to these social media platforms, and then email a copy to my mum, and then delete yourself, but only after you've archived and flagged yourself. And you can do all of that in one go, which is really useful. And it's like, I don't even care how much it costs. It's really ridiculously cheap in the grand scheme of things. And the second thing is something ironically called Things 2.0. And I wouldn't have bigged them up in the past, to be honest. I actually left them alone for many years because they upset me because they didn't have reminders and stuff. But here's a way that Drafts works with things. So, example, prior to our discussion, I probably threw some information into Drafts, framing the kind of conversation I might want to do. I think I did. And then I fired that by hitting copy over to you, which automatically put a copy of it into Evernote for me before deleting and flagging itself and archiving itself and all of that. But it also sent a copy of itself to Things, which is this project management tool, and allows me to sort of prioritize my business workings and life in that way. So I find that tremendously useful, and I'm really glad. Some people use Trello. I talked about that back in the day. Some people use all sorts of other things, but for me, I have found that I didn't get along with that Kanban style of, and this is where you've got this kind of card visual depiction happening. I didn't find I was getting on very well with that, and the old traditional to-do is working much better for me, and that's what Things does.
Fantastic, brilliant, and didn't even organise that. Didn't even.
I couldn't help myself.
Plan that ahead. Yeah, I know you're going. It's the nostalgia of it.
Yes, it is.
You wanted to go back to the old days, how it used to be, man.
Yeah.
Listen, thanks ever so much.
I didn't even get into scheduling or anything. I mean,
I know. Otherwise, that's another bloody interview hour that we've got.
Oh, for sure.
Anyway, yeah, just finally then, obviously, to finish, and I know we could talk, as I said at the start, we could probably talk for another hour quite easily. So just give us, you've covered and mentioned it, but just finally clarify and confirm how people find out more about you and get in touch with you to talk more about what you do and how you can help them.
Well, I'm available on more or less every social platform that I should be, or that most people care about. But on that very topic I mentioned earlier on about rented land, to hell with them all. Ultimately, I am Marcus Boswell. I am a social selling consultant. You, the audience, or anybody else can now find me on www.marcusboswell.com. And right there, that will take you to other avenues if you want. But if you want to engage with me, you'll find my details, my number, my email being marcus@marcusboswell.com. So I totally, absolutely welcome any emails from the audience. If you have any questions or if there's anything else that you want to know, by all means hit me up on marcus@marcusboswell.com, and I will be honoured to engage with you.
Brilliant. Mate, thanks ever so much for that. I knew we'd get round to it eventually. Absolute pleasure, as always. And thank you. And
It's been my absolute
soon,
pleasure.
I'm sure.
Thank you so much for your
Thanks a
time
lot,
and
mate.
for engaging.
Take care.
Cheers, mate. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.